He was just a janitor, a single dad cleaning the halls of a billion-dollar company, until one broken elevator changed both their lives forever. What started as a tragedy turned into a story of courage, humanity, and unexpected connection. The clock struck 11 as Ethan Cole tightened his worn-out gloves and pushed the mop bucket across the gleaming marble floor of Hartley Industries. The building, towering above the city skyline, was a symbol of wealth and power, a place where dreams were built for some and forgotten by others. For Ethan, it was just another night, another shift spent cleaning up after people who would never know his name. His reflection stared back at him from the glass walls, tired eyes, unshaven face, and a faded uniform that smelled faintly of bleach. Yet beneath that exhaustion was a man who carried more strength than anyone in that building could ever imagine. Ethan was a single dad, raising his 6-year-old daughter Lily on his own. His wife Mia had passed away 3 years ago after a long illness that drained their savings and shattered his world. Since then, his life had been reduced to a rhythm of survival, work, home, and Lily. Every evening before leaving for his night shift, he'd kneel beside her bed, reading her favorite fairy tale about knights and heroes until her eyes fluttered shut. She always asked the same question before falling asleep. "Daddy, are you a hero too?" And Ethan would smile softly, brushing her hair away from her forehead. "No, sweetheart," he'd whisper. "I just clean up after them." The halls of Hartley Industries were quiet, filled only with the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint echo of his mop swishing against the tiles. Ethan preferred it that way. He didn't mind being invisible. Invisibility kept life simple. No questions, no judgments, just work. But sometimes, as he passed the large portraits of Madison Hartley, the company's powerful and glamorous CEO, he couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and disbelief. To him, she was another world entirely, someone born into a life of control, luxury, and choices. The kind of person who would never notice a janitor wiping her office floor at midnight. Still, Ethan took pride in his work. Every trash bin emptied, every floor polished, every glass panel shined. It all mattered to him. It was his way of holding on to dignity, of proving that no matter how small the job, effort could still mean something. The other janitors often joked that he worked too hard for too little, but Ethan didn't do it for the paycheck alone. He did it for Lily. Every dollar meant a meal, a school book, or a warm winter coat for the little girl who called him her hero. That night, as he finished cleaning the executive corridor, Ethan paused by the panoramic window overlooking the sleeping city. Beyond the glass, neon lights blinked like restless stars. He wondered what it would feel like to belong to that world, to be seen, respected, and free from struggle. But he quickly shook the thought away. Daydreams were a luxury he couldn't afford. He had no idea that within the next few hours, fate would drag him out of the shadows and make the invisible man impossible to ignore. Madison Hartley's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she strode through the executive hallway, her assistant trailing behind, clutching a tablet full of numbers, reports and unanswered messages. It was well past 10, but for Madison, time was a concept she rarely respected. She had built Hartley Industries into one of the most powerful conglomerates in the city, earning both admiration and resentment in equal measure. Her reputation was legendary, calm under pressure, cold in boardrooms, and ruthless when necessary. But behind that flawless facade of tailored suits and perfect posture was a woman who hadn't slept properly in months. Every decision she made carried a weight most people couldn't fathom. And tonight, that weight felt heavier than ever. The quarterly report had come in short. Investors were restless. A deal she'd spent 2 years negotiating was on the brink of collapse. And worse, whispers about her leadership were circulating among her own board members. "She's losing her edge," one of them had said during a meeting, not realizing the glass walls weren't as soundproof as he thought. Those words cut deeper than she'd admit. Madison had spent her entire life proving she was more than her father's legacy, more than a woman in a man's world. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, it was all to stay at the top. But lately, she felt like the walls were closing in. Her assistant hesitated as she reached the elevator. "Ma'am, maybe you should call it a night," he suggested timidly. Madison gave a short, dismissive smile. "I'll rest when the world does, Peter," she replied, pressing the button for the top floor, her private office. The doors slid open, revealing the sleek metallic interior lined with mirrored walls. She stepped inside alone, phone in hand, scanning through the endless flood of emails. Deals, complaints, schedules. It never stopped. The doors closed with a soft hum, sealing her inside the metal box that carried her between two worlds, the empire she ruled and the solitude that consumed her. As the elevator ascended, the lights flickered once, then again. Madison frowned, glancing up. A faint creak echoed through the shaft, followed by a low, grinding noise. She tapped the emergency stop button, but before she could react, a violent jolt threw her off balance. The elevator lurched downward several feet, slamming her against the mirrored wall. Her phone flew from her hand and shattered on the floor. Sparks erupted from the control panel as the lights flickered madly, plunging her into flashing bursts of light and shadow. "Help!" she shouted, pounding the door with her fists. But the only answer was the groan of twisted metal. The elevator dropped another few feet, then stopped abruptly with a deafening crack that sent her sprawling. Pain shot through her shoulder as she hit the ground. Her heart pounded, adrenaline flooding her veins. She tried to reach the emergency intercom, but the panel was dark. The last thing she saw before her vision blurred was her own reflection, strong, composed, and terrified for the first time in years. Then everything went black. The sound was unlike anything Ethan Cole had ever heard before, a deep metallic scream that echoed through the empty halls of Hartley Industries. It was sharp, sudden, and followed by the violent tremor of the building itself. He froze for half a second, gripping his mop handle like a weapon, his pulse racing. Then came the crash. It wasn't just a malfunction or a power surge. It was the kind of sound that made your body move before your brain could catch up. Without thinking, Ethan dropped his mop and sprinted toward the source of the noise, the executive elevator shaft. The corridors on the upper floors were dimly lit, the hum of electricity flickering in the ceiling lights. A faint trail of smoke leaked from the seams of the elevator doors. Ethan's breath came in short bursts as he reached the control panel and jabbed at the emergency call button. Nothing. No light, no sound, just dead silence. "Hello, is anyone in there?" he shouted, pressing his ear to the door. For a moment there was no response. Then faintly he heard it, a weak groan. Someone was alive. Ethan's training didn't prepare him for this. He was a janitor, not a rescue worker. But he knew one thing: time was running out. He looked around for something he could use and spotted a steel maintenance crowbar resting against a wall nearby. "Hang on!" he yelled, prying the metal doors apart. Sparks shot out as the twisted frame resisted him, but inch by inch he forced the gap wider. The smell of burning wires and hot metal filled his lungs. When he finally managed to open the doors enough to see inside, his heart dropped. There, lying on the elevator floor, was Madison Hartley, the CEO herself, unconscious and bleeding from a cut on her forehead. Her once immaculate white blouse was streaked with dust and grime, her hair disheveled, her body limp. Ethan hesitated only for a second before swinging himself into action. The elevator car was jammed halfway between floors, its cables whining in protest. He knew it could give way at any moment. Come on," he muttered under his breath, wedging the crowbar to keep the doors open. Carefully he climbed down to reach her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he said, checking her pulse. Relief washed over him when he felt the faint rhythm beneath his fingertips. She was alive. With a deep breath, he slid his arms under her shoulders, lifting her as gently as he could. The elevator groaned again, the sound sending chills through him. "Not now," he whispered, pulling her upward toward the opening. It was a struggle. She was taller than he expected, her designer heels catching on the floor panel, but adrenaline gave him strength. With one final push, he managed to pull her through. The moment he set her down safely on the hallway floor, the crowbar slipped and the elevator plunged. The crash echoed like thunder from the shaft below. Ethan stared into the darkness, chest heaving, realization settling in. If he'd been a second later, they both would have been gone. He turned back to the unconscious woman, brushing dust from her face. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice trembling. As he dialed for emergency help, he couldn't help but think how strange fate was, how a man who spent his nights cleaning up after others had just saved the most powerful person in the building. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, warming the sterile white walls. Madison Hartley blinked her eyes open, her head throbbing as fragments of memory flickered. The screech of metal, the violent drop, then the face of a man pulling her out of the darkness. She shifted slightly, wincing from the pain in her shoulder. Beside her bed, a nurse smiled gently. "You're lucky, Miss Hartley. Another few seconds and that elevator would have taken you down with it." Madison's lips parted, but no words came. "Who?" she managed weakly, her voice hoarse. "Who saved me?" The nurse glanced at the clipboard. "A maintenance worker. Ethan Cole. He's the reason you're still here." Madison leaned back against the pillow, absorbing the name. It didn't sound familiar, just ordinary, like the kind of name that never made it into the newspapers. She was used to powerful names, the kind that commanded rooms and sealed deals. Yet something about that name felt different, real, unpretentious, and strangely grounding. As the day went on, she found herself asking to see him, but Ethan never came. The hospital staff told her he'd refused any reward and had already returned to work. That alone surprised her. Most people would have capitalized on saving a billionaire, but he hadn't even asked for thanks. 3 days later, Madison returned to the office, determined to confront her fear head-on. The building's towering glass walls felt colder than usual, the polished floors echoing beneath her cautious steps. Every passing employee looked at her differently now, with awe, with gossip, but she didn't care. She walked straight to the maintenance floor, a part of the building she'd never seen before. The air smelled faintly of oil and detergent, a stark contrast to the perfumed air of her office. And there he was, Ethan Cole, mopping the floor, headphones in, lost in quiet rhythm. She paused for a moment, observing him. His movements were deliberate, focused. Not a man looking for attention, but someone who took pride in simple work. When he finally noticed her, he froze, the mop slipping slightly from his hand. "Miss Hartley," he said, startled. I didn't expect—" "You saved my life," she interrupted softly. He scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. "Anyone would have done the same." She shook her head. "No, most people wouldn't have risked theirs." Ethan gave a faint smile, eyes lowering. "Guess I was just in the right place at the right time." Madison studied him closely. He didn't boast, didn't even seem to realize the magnitude of what he'd done. There was humility in his tone, the kind that came from living through hardship. "At least let me thank you properly," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Maybe dinner?" Ethan hesitated, chuckling nervously. "I'm not really the dinner with the boss type." Madison smiled faintly. "Then maybe coffee." For the first time in years, Madison Hartley felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude that wasn't tied to business, a connection that wasn't transactional. As she walked away, she glanced back once more. Ethan had already returned to his work, invisible again to the world, but not to her, never again to her. The days following Madison's visit passed quietly, but something inside her had shifted. The near-death experience had forced her to confront a truth she'd long ignored, that success meant nothing without humanity. Every board meeting, every profit report suddenly felt hollow, compared to the simple sincerity she'd seen in Ethan Cole's eyes. He hadn't saved her because of her wealth or status. He'd done it because it was right. That kind of integrity was rare, and Madison couldn't let it go unnoticed. She instructed her assistant Peter to find out more about him, but discreetly. She didn't want to embarrass him or turn his act of bravery into a headline. What Peter discovered broke through the last of Madison's icy composure. Ethan Cole, 32 years old, widowed, raising a 6-year-old daughter named Lily. He worked double shifts, sometimes cleaning offices and taking odd handyman jobs just to make ends meet. No debt, no criminal record, just a man doing everything he could to give his daughter a better life. Madison sat in silence after reading his file, her heart heavy with a kind of empathy she hadn't felt in years. She remembered her own father, a self-made businessman who once told her, "Real strength isn't in building empires, it's in carrying others when you're barely standing yourself for the first time." She understood what he meant. Later that week, Madison found herself standing in a small cafe across from Ethan's apartment building. Through the window, she saw him with his daughter. Lily's laughter was light and unfiltered, the sound of a child who still believed the world was good. Ethan listened intently to her, smiling softly, the exhaustion on his face replaced by love. Madison felt an ache in her chest, an ache she didn't quite understand. She'd spent her entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Yet here was a man who wanted nothing at all. That night, she sat in her office and began to write. It wasn't a business proposal or an executive memo, but a handwritten letter sealed in an envelope. Along with it, she placed a document, a full scholarship for Lily Cole to attend one of the best private schools in the city. Fully funded through a new Hartley Industries initiative she would soon announce publicly. The program would be called Hearts of Hartley, designed to recognize and support the everyday heroes who kept the company and the world running. The next morning, when Ethan arrived at work, he found the envelope in his locker. Confused, he opened it and read the note. "Mr. Cole, heroes rarely see themselves as such, but they are the ones who remind us what truly matters. This is not payment, it's a thank you from one human being to another, for saving a life and for inspiring change." Madison Hartley Ethan stood there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. Tears welled in his eyes, not from pride, but from relief, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, good deeds still meant something in this world. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to smile freely. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. Months had passed since the accident, yet the echoes of that night still lingered in both their lives. Hartley Industries had changed in subtle but powerful ways. Under Madison's leadership, the company began prioritizing people over profits, launching community programs, scholarships, and employee welfare initiatives that made headlines for all the right reasons. But few knew that the inspiration for those changes came not from a boardroom, but from a janitor who had once risked everything to save her life. Ethan Cole never sought recognition, but his quiet humility had become a symbol of integrity within the company. Ethan's own life had begun to transform as well. With the scholarship Madison arranged, Lily started attending a top-tier school where she thrived instantly. Her laughter returned in full force, her dreams growing bigger with every story she read. Ethan had been promoted to building supervisor, a position that paid better and carried respect, though he still rolled up his sleeves to help the crew clean when they were short-staffed. He hadn't changed who he was. He'd just been given a chance to be seen. Still, every time he caught sight of Madison in the halls, an unspoken tension hung between them, gratitude, admiration, and something neither dared to name. One evening, as the last employees left for the night, Ethan was doing a final inspection of the lobby when he heard footsteps behind him. "You still working late, Mr. Cole?" came a familiar voice. He turned to find Madison standing there, dressed down for once. No power suit, no entourage, just a woman holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "Old habits," Ethan said with a chuckle. "You?" She smiled faintly. "Trying to learn how to leave work at work. Not doing very well." She handed him one of the cups, and for a few quiet moments they stood side by side, watching the city lights shimmer beyond the glass. "You've changed this place," Ethan said finally. "People notice. It feels different now." Madison turned to look at him, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen. "No, Ethan," she said. "You changed it. You reminded me that this company, this life, means nothing if we forget the people who make it possible." He looked down, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I just did what anyone should." She shook her head. "That's the thing. Most people wouldn't. For the first time, there was no barrier between them. Not wealth, not status, not fear. Just two souls who had collided by chance and emerged changed. "You ever think about that night?" she asked quietly. "Every day," he admitted. "Not because of what happened, but because of what it led to." Their eyes met, and the silence that followed spoke louder than words. Outside, the city buzzed with life, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding within those glass walls. A billionaire and a janitor. Two worlds once divided, now bound by a single act of courage. Madison raised her cup slightly in a toast. "To second chances," she said. Ethan clinked his against hers. "And to the people who remind us we're still human." In that moment, they both realized something profound. Sometimes fate doesn't bring people together to rewrite their pasts. It does so to show them who they were always meant to be. When life knocks you down, remember, every act of kindness can change a story forever. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Drew Daily Stories, where real emotions meet unforgettable tales.